All righty. Good morning, everybody. This is Cynthia LaRue with DYOPATH. Thank you so much for joining this morning's webinar on Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, otherwise known as CMMC, for government contractors. This is actually part 2 of our 3-part mini-series. Our part 3 will actually be on December the 10th. We hope you'll join us again. And today our hosts are Matt Briggs, Director of New Business Development. Good morning, Matt. We also have James Melchor, our CTO. Good morning, James. And we have Sean Sherjack, our IT Security Practice Lead. And with that, I want to make sure everyone knows that as you come into the roundtable, we have about 30 folks joining today. So you do come in with no camera on and you are muted. However, we highly encourage you to send us questions. You can chat directly to me, Cynthia LaRue. You can use the chat option. You can use the Q&A option. There's also a little raise hand feature. You can raise your hand, and we'd be more than happy to unmute you, or you can just simply send me your question, and I will pose it to the panelists. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
All right. Thank you, Cynthia. Good morning, everyone. We appreciate you spending time out of your busy day, busy schedules to talk about CMMC certifications that are looming in the future. So as a reminder, our first session was focused on defining really what CMMC is, which members of the defense industry base it applies to, and then really we did an FAQ, a frequently asked questions and answer session. So we appreciate all of the questions we got in round 1. As Cynthia said, please don't be shy in chatting us with questions, and we'll try our best to answer them real time. And if we run out of time because a 30-minute session, then we will follow up an email with everyone that has attended. So this particular session is really going to focus on, I would say, actionable items. So, ultimately, you're going to be asked to pass a future CMMC audit. And so I want to give you some more actionable stuff this go around. And so just a quick refresher, in particular for those that weren't on the roundtable last time, DYOPATH is an IT outsourcer. We've been in business for 24 years, and we've worked with 400 commercial and federal clients. We've spent the better part of 2 decades preparing organizations for various audits from an IT and IT security perspective. That said, we've got significant experience working with both federal agencies, Department of Defense, HHS, DOJ, Veterans Affairs, et cetera, and a wide range of federal contractors. So we thought it'd be interesting to host a series of discussions about CMMC and the certification process, given that a large percentage of those of you that are in the DIB are going to be asked to pass the CMMC audit or get CMMC certified in one of the 5 levels. So without further ado, we're going to do some Q&A, and we're going to tee things up for Sean, our IT security practice lead, and James, our CTO. So Sean, I'd like to first hear your high-level thoughts on audit preparedness. So we can certainly drill down into the details in a little bit, but what are critical next steps in order for the attendees to successfully prepare for a CMMC audit?
Okay. So sorry about that. I actually had a call in the background as well. So I think the first thing is really to go through and download the controls to get those in front of you. They're available. There's a wide variety of sources, but get those controls in front of you and just to start going through them and see what you have. So what I would want to do is take those controls and then map them over to what we already have, and then try to come up with a budget based on what you have and what you may need to get. So I think it's really that simple. Now, admittedly, that's kind of high level, so it certainly turns into a lot of detail. That's a good starting step.
Yeah, Matt, and I'd like to add on to that one. One of the other things that we touched on in the last roundtable really was, identifying that CUI or CUI data, right? So one, I think Sean is part of that is understanding what you're doing, kind of where do you fall to, right? So are you a level 1 or level 2? So a contractor that might not have that CUI data, but the only type are on your network, right? Working with a contractor, it might only be like HR data or purchase orders or things like that. So kind of understanding where you fall, in a level 1 to level 2, right? You could fall within a level 3 or 4 where now you have a little bit of that data, and then level 4 and 5 is really when right? You have that data. So I think also it's just understanding where you stand within the CMI level or CMMC levels as well. Sorry.
Yeah, and let me see if I can add a little bit more to that. Even at least from what we're seeing so far, it seems that some of that is being pushed down just from the the upper level contracts and so forth. And so even if, at least from what I'm seeing, even if you are technically, let's say, a level 1 or a level 2, in many cases the bigger contractors and so forth are pushing down a level 3. So that's something to be aware of. So look at what the expectations and so forth are going to be of you, regardless of whether or not you think you can land at a level 1 or level 2. Another consideration.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, James. Shaw. Okay. Go ahead.
What are common mistakes made when prepping for an audit like CMMC? What are common mistakes made when prepping for an audit like CMMC?
All right, Sean, you want to take this first?
Yeah, sure. And first, let me give you just a little bit of background. So a significant portion of my background is actually audit. So I grew up on that side, and that's kind of where I come from. Audit is a different mindset from operations for sure. And so a lot of it is about what you can prove versus, maybe you have some things covered and you're thinking you're doing okay, but if you can't really prove those things, then it really doesn't mean much to an auditor whenever they come through. So I think the biggest mistake is probably thinking that you're covered, and maybe you are, but then not having the right type of materials to prove that you are. So that's the biggest mistake in my opinion.
Yeah, Sean, I think from my perspective as well, right, to add to that is I'll take the operational approach. Looking at it solely from a tooling perspective is also a big mistake. I have this tool, well, so let's go buy and invest in some of these tools without really doing the research of what you need. Tooling is great, but this is a program, right? In my mind, right? CMMC is kind of a program, so it can't just solely focus on the tooling. So. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess, guys, I'll add, if CMMC is a little bit of a mystery to the attendees, there are third parties like DYOPATH and other very reputable firms that can help demystify CMMC. And so I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but doing something like a diagnostics assessment, leveraging or leaning on the appropriate controls mapped to the level that you need to certify at, and then creating a roadmap on how to remediate or shore up gaps, reassess, and then ultimately have an auditor come in. Logically, that's what we're seeing in the field, so that organizations give themselves the best chance of passing that third-party audit. So, James, Sean, anything else to add on that front?
I think one other thing I would probably add is just to underscore that tooling point that in the audit, let's call it the mindset. There's another thing which is called client control considerations. So often you can go out and you can get a tool. So let's say that you're going to use a particular data center, or you're going to use let's say Office 365, or just some of the available tooling that's out there. And those tools may have what's called a FedRAMP report, which provides significant coverage for controls that they are responsible for. But that still doesn't address the controls that the end user or the So even if you're taking, let's say Office 365 or whatever other environment you're looking at, you still have to look at how is that data getting into Office 365, how am I managing it, how am I managing that interface into it, and so forth. So just something you want to make sure you don't forget.
Yeah, can't overlook the configuration portion, right, of the tools.
Certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. And for those in the audience that heard James mention CUI or CUI, just a quick reminder, that's controlled, unclassified, information that you may create and have a hold of, or be part of sort of downstream accessing or creating controlled, unclassified information. And as we mentioned last time, if you're uncertain what level you need to be at, certify at, you can certainly ask your clients, whether they're prime contractors or some other contractors in the supply chain, on where they think you need to be certified so that you can stay ahead of it. So one of the things we haven't hit on, and Sean, your experience as an auditor, is evidentiary artifacts or documentation. And I know that as we work with our clients, trying to help them get their house in order, so to speak, on documentation. Can you just talk a little bit about that, you and James? Documentation that's important. Why is it important? Love to hear more on that.
Yeah, certainly. So I think it comes back to maybe the definition of a control. And I'm going to go this way by example. Let's say that we have a system and we have the password settings. So we've got that annoying 8 or 9 character limit, whatever that is, that thing that people complain about. So having that enabled is one point. So but just having it enabled doesn't necessarily mean that it's a control. By control, what we are meaning is that it is auditable, that someone can come in, they keep up with it, that they can take a picture, and that we're making sure that setting stays the way it needs to be. So that's just for a configuration element. Now take that same concept and you apply it to a policy, to a procedure, to other things that you're doing. What happens is you have things in your organization that are, say, manually intensive. So these are things that people actually do, they're procedures, and what they want to do is capture evidence that they're performing these types of things. And so what that implies is you're going to need a repository somewhere to keep track of all this evidence. You're going to need some kind of tool. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be service desk system, something to keep track of all these different evidentiary matters. So when you say you're coming in and that you look at the accounts on an annual basis and you're making sure that all your user accounts are where they need to be, the auditor is going to be expecting that you have some sort of criteria for review, that there's a person who's designated for performing this review, and that when they perform this review, they document what they reviewed and then they put it in a repository somewhere so that they can then come in and look at it a year later and say, it looks like you looked at those accounts on a monthly basis or an annual basis, whatever you said you would do, and it's provable that you did it. So that's what they're looking for. And so if you take that concept and you apply it to all of the controls that are in CMMC, it could be quite daunting. But that's kind of ultimately the beginning of what we're talking about here when we say controls and evidentiary artifacts and so forth.
It's like Sean, it's like an active log, right? What happened when, here's where it was at this state, this was changed, documented, right? So it's like it's just a I always like to say it's just this continuous log that is running. So you have to think of it that way, right? Here's where it is. Here's what I changed. Who changed it? Did they have authority to change it? Those type of things, right?
Definitely, definitely. And I would also say, despite what this standard is attempting to address some of the weaknesses in previous standards, and so what we're trying to do is move towards a certified, a solid method of looking at everyone's controls. But I will say that there is a human element involved. So in some cases, you may get an audit light. I mean, they're looking for evidence. They'll look for a certain type of evidence. In many cases, you may be surprised you can get away with things that maybe you shouldn't have. But on the side of that, I won't say there's angry auditors. So they'll come in and just had a bad day or looking a little more tightly at things, and they want you to provide good solid evidence that will stand up in court and all those types of things. So there's really a range there that you need to be aware of, and I would say that the way I would think of it is if you yourself look at it a year later, can you go into court and someone calls you into court and they say, hey, what can you say that would convince me that you did this and this on such and such date? So, well, here we go. Here's my law. So I would try to think of it, and that way you have a much better, much more solid level of evidence.
Yeah. So Sean, were you a happy auditor or an angry auditor?
I think I was probably in between usually. I
Okay.
tended to focus on the objectives. So thank you.
Sure. So let's change gears a little bit and talk about diagnostics assessments. So what does that mean, and what is generally included in a diagnostics assessment as you prepare for an audit? So this would obviously come before the audit. Sean?
Sure. So the thing to keep in mind is for CMMC, there is a cert. So that means there is a group of audits will come out certification. A diagnostic is preparing for that. So that means it's getting your shop before the auditors show up by doing a type of pre-audit. What that involves is going through each of the controls, looking what's been documented, look at what's actually performed, looking at the policies, the procedures, looking at the configuration, perhaps performing a vulnerability scan, and trying to determine where the actual system is, where the controls sit, where the processes and so forth sit, how mature they are, and then get a rating, say yes or no, this control passes. And depending on what level you're looking at, for level 1, it's a lot easier to pass. And then on up to level 2, 3, 4, and 5, it's increasingly difficult. So I would treat a diagnostic assessment as more of a, it's like a half audit, half consultative type project. As the other part of it is you want to provide good guidance on how to get ready for the audit as you're going through it. So it should include good recommendations. I don't think it should be limited to just an audit. It should be here's some of the things that you need to do. Whereas ordinarily on an audit, they can't comment that directly. They'll just say you passed or failed.
James, anything to add?
No, I think Sean covered that.
Okay. And some of the other things that we hear in the field, so post-diagnostics assessment, there are likely going to be gaps that are identified. Can you speak to, because this has come up, who's generally responsible for remediation post-assessment? What does that look like?
Well, of course, that depends upon the organization. But I think there needs to be someone who's going to take charge of a roadmap ultimately. So in some organizations, you may have a compliance officer. For smaller organizations, maybe not so much. So it could fall in the hands of a business leader or maybe some hybrid in between. Ultimately, you need to have someone internally within the organization to kind of act as a liaison to the rest of the organization. And then if you do hire a third party or consulting agency, they would come there and or help with that roadmap, depending on what resources and so forth that you have available. So with some companies, let's say that they already have a SIEM, they already have a SOC, all that type of stuff. They've already got those capabilities, and probably they may not will help them other than getting the controls aligned to those. Versus other organizations who are doing So I think they would at least want to set up a point of contact to begin that roadmap to remediation.
Yeah, James?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sean. I think, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong. Like other certifications or other things, sometimes they actually dictate that there are certain individuals that are running the program, right, or owners of certain sections and things like that as well. So, in some instances, it's not necessarily the outside person, but I think companies need to realize that an investment needs to be made sometimes in an individual to keep up and run that program, right? And it's outlined in a lot of these, in a lot of the certifications that are out there. So,
in fact, I would add on to what you said, and it goes back to one of the questions someone asked earlier about biggest mistakes. I think one of the mistakes that can be made is some of these controls. There can be this tendency to say, well, here's a new framework, CMMC thing. I don't like it. You know what? Who can I just push this off? So I think that should be some internal ownership, performing all of the things, but it does having some level of accountability. Just don't go over the fence, so to speak.
Yeah. Cynthia, it looks like we've got another question coming in.
Thank you.
Want me to...
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, will government reimburse contractor expenses that attain their CMMC certification? Will the government reimburse contractor expenses that attain their CMMC certification?
The short answer is yes, it is reimbursable, the audit. But Sean, feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, you call it out, at least as I understand the wording around this. In the event that whatever level you're subject to, that expense, this is for CMMC compliance. This is what we need, so it'll just be part of the contract. It's actually it's like just a couple sentences.
Yeah, good question. And then, I know we're running out of time here. I also wanted to cover, there's a lot of questions about controls and mapping tools to take care of required controls that need to be in place. So I'd like to share my screen, and Sean, maybe you can talk through this spreadsheet and what we've put together, starting with the tools map.
Certainly. So with any what I call or security framework, for dealing with is a list of controls or control objectives, and there's going to be a list of things to achieve those objectives. Sometimes it's very clear and pointed out. Sometimes they just kind of leave the reader to figure out what it's supposed to mean. So I thought CMMC is probably so this is our interpretation of what is expected. And so what you'll see here is this first screen that we're looking at right now is just for tooling alone. What we've done is we have gone through a list of controls and based or the expectations at each level, tried to figure out what is the minimum tooling. So if you see at the start, it says firewall and malware prevention, badge log. There's you at least have to have firewall and antivirus to even be in the game. Okay, that's the minimum that we're expecting. But then the further up you go, you see that increasing complexity starts. I want to point out one in particular, MFA. They're on, I think it's on row 14. Multiple factor authentication. So that's where I'm not a password, but you may have a device or a token, very similar if you log onto the bank. So that expectation is set already at level 2. They have another one I want to dwell on, this tool. So there's a couple different ways you can look at that. You might call that a SIEM, which is a greater expense in organizations. But there may be some ones that are smaller organizations, such as looking at your logs on a periodic basis. That means you dedicate time and have to go in and look at the logs and check them. And hopefully they're doing, whereas a SIEM could do something like that more on an automated basis. The point being, they're not necessarily requiring a SIEM at level 2, but as you get to level 3, it's basically you need to have a SIEM. And so, of course, the further and further the level goes, the more and more tools that they are expecting. So this is just an output from us going through the tools. I think if you flip briefly over to the Navy tab, and I don't mean to alarm everyone and just scare you, but just an idea. If you look on the left, and Matt, I don't know if you can zoom a little bit, maybe. The way it's broken out is basically you would have a policy, you would have a practice, and then there's different things that would support it. So it goes through a list of very common controls that we've seen from other frameworks in the past, such as NIST 853, but they have narrowed the scope of controls. So the first one being access control, meaning that you have your users, you're making sure that they have passwords, that good passwords, those types of things, that you have a policy that governs them, that you have a process for onboarding and offboarding. And then what you want to do is just, in this tool, we went to the right, if you scroll over to the right a little bit, what we did is we mapped each of these to, there's either a tool or capability, there's a process, there's a standard, all these different things that you would need in order to achieve that objective. So this is just a tool that we use internally. There are other tools that are out there, but I just want to give you an idea of the types of things that you could do to get ready for CMMC compliance.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And we want to be sensitive to everyone's time. So we're very close to nearing the end. Again, appreciate everyone's taking time out of their busy schedule. Are there any other questions we have from the attendees, Cynthia? If not, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. But before we do that, if there are questions, you can certainly reach out to Sean, James, or myself directly, and we'd be happy to have direct conversations to answer any questions, comments, or concerns. Cynthia, that said, back over to you.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's a great table today, and we really appreciate everyone's participation. And we will have our third session on this mini-series on December the 10th. We highly encourage you to please go out and register for that. All you have to do is go to the DYOPATH.com website, go to events. You can click there and get registered for that. But again, that's part 3 of this mini-series on December the 10th at 10:30 a.m. And we will be emailing everyone the recording to today's roundtable. So if you missed anything, you can go back and listen to it, or if you need to share. So with that, have a lovely day. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you.